Are you a little anxious about starting that soft diet after weight loss surgery? Are you feeling a little bit scared about trying real food again? Hi there, my name is Diana Lopez, and I am your bariatric dietitian at My Bariatric Adventure, where we guide you as you navigate the twists and turns of your bariatric adventure. And in this video, we are going to talk about that soft food diet. I'm going to give you the basics of that diet, what you can expect on that diet, and then once we finish with that, hang on because I am going to give you a whole bunch of tips, do's and don'ts for that soft food diet. And at the very end, I've got a freebie for you as well. Let's dive in and start talking about that soft food diet. So protein is of the utmost importance when you start eating solid food again. So what you will do is when you are eating, your primary focus is to make sure that you are getting all of the protein that you need. And that protein will come in the form of lean or very lean proteins. So that would be things like turkey, chicken, fish, shrimp. It could also be egg whites. It could be ground meats like ground beef, ground pork. It could also, I said egg whites, but it could be eggs as well. Yogurt, cottage cheese, string cheese is on this diet as well. So we start by proteins first, and then the rest of the plate, where you're moving around the plate. So the other parts of the plate, you're going to have fruits and veggies. And for fruits and veggies, for the soft diet, it needs to be soft enough that you can mash it with a fork. So it doesn't matter if it's broccoli, cauliflower, spinach, mushrooms, green beans, carrots, any of those veggies. You just got to be able to have it cooked soft enough you can mash it with a fork. Or if you're going to choose to do fruit, you need to be able to mash that fruit with a fork. So maybe bananas. You could also do that unsweetened applesauce like you were doing with some of the other diet phases. You could also do like the little fruit cups that have like the fruit cocktail or the peaches and pears in there. Just as long as that fruit is soft enough you can mash it with a fork, right? So that's where we're starting. And then the other part of that plate would be the carbohydrates on your plate. Now, carbs will make you very full, and we're trying to make sure that you're getting in all the protein that you need. So usually in the beginning, we really minimize that carbohydrate serving. In the practices that I work with, in the beginning, they'll tell you a couple tablespoons of carbohydrates with a meal. So the starchy foods on your plate, or the carbohydrate foods, generally we want them to be, again, soft enough that you could mash them with a fork. So you might be doing potatoes, you might be doing sweet potatoes, a butternut, or an acorn squash. Those are probably pretty good choices at this time. Again, for the carb category, nothing too fancy. Some practices will allow you to do things like rice and pasta and bread, but I'm going to actually talk a little bit more about those particular foods when we talk about the do's and don'ts for this diet. So hang on to that thought and we will come back to that. And then usually you're eating about a half a cup of food to up to 1 cup of food per meal. So that would be about half the size of a tennis ball to the size of a whole tennis ball. So you're not eating a lot of food. You want to eat nice and slow, take small bites, chew really well. And the other thing to remember is that we continue to have you separate eating from drinking at this point. That's the basics of the diet: lean or very lean proteins, fruits and veggies you can mash with a fork, a small amount of carbs, couple tablespoons of carbs that you can mash with a fork. Nothing too fancy, nothing too exciting. So that's the basics of that soft diet. All right, so now let's talk about those tips, those do's and don'ts. Tip number 1, cut everything up to the size of a pea. So you want to make sure you're cutting it nice and small, because that's going to help you to remember to take small bites. All right, so that's tip number 1, cut everything up to the size of a pea. Tip number 2 is chew. So we want you to slow down the eating process. So usually we'll tell you in the beginning, each bite, we want you to chew that 20 or 30 times per bite. So a lot of chewing. We want you to eat nice and slow so that you can start to recognize tip number 3, which is the difference between satisfaction and fullness, because we want you to start practicing stopping when you feel satisfied versus feeling full. So when you're eating, fullness is pretty easy to describe. When we're eating and we're full, that is usually, our bellies hurt, our pants are tight, maybe you gotta, to breathe, you gotta take in deep breaths because you're feeling super full. So that's fullness versus satisfaction is a little more nuanced. So what I mean by that is, for satisfaction, it may be that you are eating, but the food doesn't taste as good as the first couple bites. You're kind of have kicked in autopilot. You're eating to eat because you're eating what's on your plate or in the bowl in front of you. And so we want you to be mindful and be paying attention while you're eating, so that when you start to feel satisfied, food doesn't taste as good. And you're at that point where you could either keep eating or you could stop. When you start to feel like, I think I've had enough, that's when we want you to stop. Because for a lot of people, what they've told me is that all it takes for them sometimes to go from satisfaction to fullness can be one bite. So maybe you've got your plate in front of you and you've just got one bite left and you're like, I feel like I'm pretty satisfied. But we all feel guilty if we leave that one little bite on the plate. And so maybe you pick it up and you eat it, and next thing you know, you're like, oh, I feel so bad. That's what we're trying to avoid. So if this is a struggle for you, practice this before you've had surgery, especially if you're somebody that maybe you're a mom and your kids are eating and you've eaten your dinner and you're eating the last 2 bites off of their plates before you throw everything away and clean up, for the evening and do dishes. We want you to get away from that habit. We want you to get away from the habit of thinking you have to clean everything on your plate, because that will make you overfull and overeat, especially in the beginning, because you're probably once or twice or more are going to fill your plate up the way you would have before surgery, because you just will forget at some point, and we don't want you eating everything on that plate. We want you to be super mindful and be paying attention. All right, so that's tip number 3. Now let's talk about the 4 don'ts for that soft diet. So our first don't is, don't forget to make sure that you're drinking 48 to 64 ounces of fluid a day. At this point, the 2 most important things are to make sure you're getting all your protein, make sure you're getting all of your fluid. And it becomes a little bit more of a juggling act now, because all the time you have to wait in between eating and drinking, and that counts for meals and snacks. So stop drinking about 5 minutes before the meal or snack. It's going to take you, depending on how big it is, let's say it takes you 20 minutes to eat whatever you got in front of you, then you're going to always wait a half hour after that. I see a lot of people really struggling at this phase, and if that's you, don't get depressed about it, don't get anxious about it, just muddle your way through it, because it will get easier with time. All right, so that's our don't tip number 1, don't forget to drink all of your fluid. All right, our don't tip number 2 is to avoid fibrous foods, things like nuts, seeds, vegetables that have, or fruit have a hard peel. So think like a cucumber, think like an apple. You can eat the insides of it, but not the peels, or celery with that string in there. That fibrous stuff can, for some people, feel like it gets stuck, and it can maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable in your belly. The other thing that isn't a strict don't, but I'll tell you the reason that I put it on my don't list after I tell you what it is, but that's lettuce or salad mix. And it's not so much that it's a really fibrous food. What we found is that people tend not to chew it enough. They forget, they just chew that lettuce 2 or 3 or 4 times, and so there can be a big wad of lettuce that feels like it's getting stuck in the top of your stomach. And we actually had in our Facebook community, a lady had eaten her lunch, a salad, and she posted, oh my gosh, it feels like something stuck. This hurts so bad. Once we dug a little bit deeper, we realized she had had a salad, probably just went into autopilot when she was eating, didn't chew it well enough. And so she ended up feeling like that was stuck there for a good probably 4 to 6 hours. So I want to help you avoid that. I would say with lettuce and salad mix, wait until maybe you're about 2 months out, just so you can get down that eating chewing really well. If you're really craving a salad, once you get past this soft diet phase, you could make a salad, but put everything in there except for the lettuce. Put your protein, put cheese, put your salad dressing and all the veggies or fruit or whatever you like in there, and mix it up and roll it around in that dressing. Give it a nice flavor. You can do that until you are at the point where you can eat lettuce again. Like I said, it's not a hard, fast rule. We've just seen people that end up getting pretty choked up with lettuce and feeling like it's stuck, and that's pretty uncomfortable. All right, so that is our tip number 2. Tip number 3, that has to do with some of those carbs that we talked about earlier. So what I would say to you is avoid gummy starches, so gummy carbohydrates. So think about like a piece of white bread, untoasted bread. When you chew that, it kind of makes a little ball in your mouth, and it can get really gummy and get stuck. So we tell people to try to avoid that. Also, pasta can do the same thing for some people. And for some people with rice, they'll find in the beginning that it feels like they eat the rice and then it grows in their stomach. If you're fearful of that, I would say just wait a little bit longer. Wait until you're, maybe maybe a month and a half, 6 weeks out before you try to add some of those foods. Add a small quantity and chew it really, really well, and give yourself time to make sure that it's not making you too overfull, because that is super uncomfortable for everybody. All right. So that's our tip number 3. Tip number 4, we already talked about this a little bit when we talked about our do's, but our don't tip number 4 is to avoid tough, overcooked meats. What I've seen with people, there's kind of 2 different categories. One is steak. I've seen people try steak, within the first month or so after surgery, and they'll tell me it feels like it just is sitting like a rock in their stomach. And I've had people tell me that with a sirloin, with a filet, with all kinds of steak. So if you find that steak does not sit well for you, it's not that you will never be able to tolerate it. It was probably just too soon. So if you tried it within the first couple of months after surgery, maybe give it 2-3 months and try it again. What I found with most people with steak, like I said, it's a little tough for them to tolerate in the beginning. Couple months out, let's say 3-4 months out, realistically, they're able to tolerate that a little bit better. I have one person, he tried steak, and what he found is it took him almost 3 years before he could really tolerate steak again. So everybody's different in that. You might tolerate it right away. It may be something that is longer out for you. But again, it needs to be a moist piece of meat. So I'm giving you all sorts of reasons to go out and buy fillets when you go out to eat and when you go to the grocery store, rather than buying a sirloin or something that's a little bit tougher. All right, and then the other category of tough meats would be if you are barbecuing or grilling, or you're going somewhere like a celebration, like a family reunion, a cookout, holiday, and everybody's cooking out. Make sure that if you're eating anything off of the grill, it's not overcooked, because I've seen people that really struggle with that as well. We had one lady, she did it too soon, but someone had given her a piece of chicken off of the grill and it was pretty well done. And again, that same thing, it felt like it got stuck in the top of her stomach, and she actually ended up having to go to the ER to have them take care of that for her. So if you're going somewhere and they've got those meats and they're overdone or overcooked, just avoid them. You might be better off, I wouldn't normally tell you this, but you might be better off eating a hot dog or a brat or something like that, if that's the case. Or bringing something yourself in the beginning when you're doing cookouts and things with other people. Or maybe you're the one that's going to be cooking it, or somebody that knows what you need and they know how to cook it right for you. All right, so those are our 4 don't tips for you. So we've talked about that soft diet, we've talked about the do's, we talked about the don'ts. So we're just going to wrap it up here, and I promise you a freebie as well. So if you go in our description below, you will see our top 5 strategies for success after weight loss surgery. So make sure you go down there, grab that link so that you can get started on the right foot after your surgery.